All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Amalia Weber. I'm the program specialist here at Rochester Hills Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's program, My Amazing Journey with Autism. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Firstly, tonight's program will be recorded and available to view about 1 week from tonight on our YouTube page and on the RHPL website shortly after. We ask that audience members please silence or turn off their cell phones before we begin in order to avoid any disturbances during the presentation. Our next program is Living with Dementia Part 3, which will be an in-person event on Thursday, September 15th at 7 p.m. You can sign up for that at calendar.rhpl.org. Our speaker tonight, Ron Sandison, is a nationally published author and speaker with autism. He is from Rochester Hills. And now, without further ado, please welcome Ron Sandison.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me good, or do I need the mic?
You need the mic so that
All right. And if you can get the PowerPoints back up. So afterwards, I'm going to be selling copies of my 3 books on autism. My first book was A Parent's Guide to Autism, Practical Advice, Biblical Wisdom. And while writing the book, I interviewed 50 of the top experts in the world who work in the autism field, people like Temple Grandin, people like Dr. Lynn Coiney. She's the founder of UCLA Autism Clinic, and she was so touched when she heard my story that she wrote original 1,000-word original story for the book. And I interviewed 20 of the most unique people on the autism spectrum with this book. I interviewed Clay Marzo, a pro surfer, Alexis Weinman, Miss Montana, and many others, and I share parts of their story throughout the book with my own story, and it has everything you need to know about autism, from diagnosis all the way to adulthood. Then my third book, Views from the Spectrum, was an ND's finalist out of 5,000 books. It was a finalist for parenting and relationships. And while writing this book, I interviewed 20 of the most remarkable people on the autism spectrum and share their stories. I share scriptures, verse, parenting advice. I share my own story. I interviewed Tarko, a pro baseball player. I interviewed Miss Tampa, Rachel Barcelona. I interviewed Armani Williams, who's right from Grosse Pointe, who's a NASCAR driver. And Dr. Trefford wrote the foreword for this book, and it was one of the final things he did before he passed away last year on December 14th, right after watching his Packers beat our Lions. And Dr. Trefford is world-renowned. He's the guy who came up with the character Rain Man. He was a consult for the movie. He was 88 years old, and he was a big influence in my life and my study of autism and the things I've learned. So I was blessed to have him write the foreword. And the interesting thing about him, too, is he mentored under Dr. Leo Kanner. Anyone know who came up with the word autism? Dr. Leo Kanner in the 1940s. So he had a big impact on the autism community. So these 2 books are just $10 each. My second book is Thought Choice Action. Sounds more like a movie title than actually a book on autism, but it's a book written by a theologian on the autism spectrum, and it's on St. Augustine and spiritual growth. And the reason I chose St. Augustine is we have over 1 million words of his still in print, far more than any 4th century or earlier writer, which means that God protected his words. And he's the first theologian, first philosopher to ever mention neurodiversity. And here's how he mentions neurodiversity. My mentor, St. Ambrose, is a genius. He can read without reading out loud. Now, everyone in here who can read, we can read without reading out loud, thank God. We don't have to hear all your dirty laundry. But in the 4th century, only 4% of the Roman Empire could read, and of that 4%, it's estimated that 95% of them couldn't read without reading out loud. So it shows that we're neurodiverse in the 1st century. If we were like the 4th century, you'd be on an airplane, you'd have to read your emails, you'd have to read your text messages, there'd be no need for TMZ. The worst would still be Trump, he'd still be reading out loud. And this book I sell for $15, and I'll have copies of all 3 books in the back. And I'm going to share with you tonight my amazing journey with autism and faith. Psalms 84:11 through 12 says, "The Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor, and no good thing does he withhold from those whose walk is blameless. O Lord Almighty, bless the man who trusts in you." And I have an interesting kind of savant gift. I have over 15,000 Bible verses memorized perfect, word perfect. And the only person I've ever met who had more verses memorized word perfect was Dr. Jack Van Impe, and he was from the Troy area, and I got to mentor and intern under him while in college. And I'll share more about that in a little while. And this verse means a lot to me because a lot of times you think of autism, you think of things that you're missing out on. Everyone's invited to the party, but you're the autistic kid, so no one invites you. Everyone's doing good in sports, but a lot of times people with autism aren't real athletic. I was lucky that I got full ride for track and cross country to college, but a lot of young adults with autism, they don't do real well at sports or real well in athletics or academics. And I'm going to share now my story and journey with autism. My development began normal. I said my first word, mommy, at 9 months, and I like to share, I said my first word, mommy, when I was getting water baptized. Any child who thinks they're getting drowned is going to cry out, mommy, mommy. But then I went at 18 months to being able to say mommy to only mum, mum, mum. And from having eye contact to zero eye contact, if I heard a sound like this, I wouldn't turn it. 20% of all children with autism go through a time of regression, and I went through that time of regression. And my mom, being a great mom, immediately took me to a pediatrician when I went through the regression, and the pediatrician said, men are like fine wine. You got to give them time. That's good for a woman dating, but it's bad advice for someone where intervention is the best way of preventing more severe autistic behavior. And women are like flowers. They blossom quickly. And my mom knew she had to respond quickly. She immediately got me in intense speech therapy. And I was in intense speech therapy all the way from age 2 to age 16. When I was 7 years old, my speech development was so delayed, my brother Chuck would introduce me to people and say, you need to meet my brother Ron, I think he's from Norway. He had me talk. No one knew what I was saying, so I became an expert on Norwegian languages. When I was 7 years old, I entered kindergarten, and my development was so delayed, my inability to communicate, my inability to interact, that the school specialist wanted to label me emotionally impaired. And my mom said, it's not emotional, it's neurological. And if you can't tell me what's going on in my son's head, I'll get him tested and come back to you in the fall and tell you exactly what it is. She took me to Henry Ford Hospital. Neuropsychologist worked with me for 3 days and just with me and came back and says, your son has autism. The school specialist said, if your son has autism, he'll never read beyond the 7th grade level. He'll never attend college. He'll never have meaningful relationships, and he'll never excel in sports. And this was 1982. In 1982, only 1 in every 10,000 children was diagnosed with autism. Now it's 1 in every 44 children. And for the 1 in 44, when the CDC just came up with that, they had me as one of the keynote speakers for the World Autism Conference on the 1 in 44. And that's how I began it, saying, when I was diagnosed, it was only 1 in 10,000. And they didn't give her much hope. But my mom was determined to prove the experts wrong. She quit her job as an art teacher and became a full-time Ron teacher. And working with me, using art, using social techniques, hiring tutors. In fact, there's one of my tutors right now, Deborah Norton, who helped me with English and made it possible for me to have those skills to be able to publish 3 nationally published books. I got a 4th book that's all written. It's going to be nationally published too. And none of that would have been possible without faith, hope, and love. 1 Corinthians 13:13, and them coming together. And my mom told the school experts, I'm going to work with him. I'm going to develop his gifts, and he's going to be successful. And by becoming a full-time Ron teacher, working with me, I was able to graduate from Oral Roberts University with bachelor's degrees in psychology and theology, a 3.9 grade point average. I went on to get my master's divinity with a perfect 4-point grade point average, and I translated 2/3 of the New Testament from Greek into English memorized 15,000 Bible verses. I ended up getting full ride my first year of college at Rochester, which is now Rochester University. Gets even confusing for someone with autism. When I was there, it was Michigan Christian College. Then it was Rochester College. Now it's Rochester University. What is it going to be next? Global Rochester? Maybe I just gave something for their president there. But the school experts didn't give much hope. And I got married on December 7th, and I like to say it will be a decade this December 7th. I like to say having autism and getting married on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, I came in like a kamikaze, a whirlwind of fire. And then March 20th, 2016, my beautiful daughter, Mikhail Marie, was here. I tried to bribe her with a gift from Five Below to come, but she says, I'm going to Lansing to hear you speak on Saturday, so I won't come. She's 6 years old now. And my mom knew she had to work with me because my development was behind. She believed in something called autism refined, not cured. I can't cough on you today, and you get the autism flu. No matter what Fauci tells you, autism isn't caused by the flu. But autism can be refined. And that's what my mom was determined to do with me. When she saw how the school system worked, it was archaic. They had a 2-teacher rule. You had one teacher in the back of the room, one in the front of the room. The one in the back made sure you didn't make an exit outside the room. The one in the front made sure you didn't go out the front door. And my mom was inspired by Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man skilled in his labor? He will serve before kings. He will not serve before obscure men. So she knew if she could refine those gifts, then I'd be able to serve before kings and accomplish great things. And she told the school specialist, if you're just babysitting my son with the 2-teacher rule, the best he's going to be is bagging groceries. The best he's going to be is a bag or a dishwasher, a boy who just holds doors open, a bellboy. And she said, but he has talents, he has gifts, and we're going to refine those, and he's going to accomplish great things. Let me first talk about autism unrefined. Autism unrefined looks like this. You're walking on the hot black pavement, maybe to go to Lake Michigan, maybe to go to the ocean, a big body of water. As you're walking in the parking lot, all of a sudden, in your bare feet, hit that cement black top, and you pick it up. It's a piece of glass. It's unrefined. Someone was having Miller time. Now you're having Technishot time. Autism unrefined for me was zero ability to filter what I said. When I thought of something, I spew it out, like that comment I made about Dr. Fauci earlier. So if I say something that offends anyone, it's autism, not me. Autism unrefined looks like this. I have very little ability to control my emotions. Most kids are like bottled water. They get shaken up, stirred up, not much is happening. I'm more like carbonated, neurologically like Mountain Dew. I get shaken up, kaboom. Anyone want to do the do? My favorite autism unrefined moment happened in 1996. I was working at a car wash, in college, and I heard on the radio on the way to go to the car wash, it was across the street from Oakland University. Today, Wayne Fonts was fired. He had one of the greatest running backs all time, Barry Sanders. He had an incredible wide receiver in Herman Moore, a great quarterback in Scott Mitchell's, and the #1 defense, and they didn't make the playoffs. So I'm drying off cars, not thinking much, and who should show up at that car wash with a Cuban cigar and a white Jaguar? Well, Wayne Fonts himself. As I'm drying off his car, I notice that kids have paper who work there have paper to get his autograph. I go in the back. I kid you not, I thought he was coaching when I handed him that paperwork. Son, is that what I think it is? Yes, Wayne Fonts, that's a job application. They announced today on 97.1 The Ticket, you were fired. Now, you see that bug there? That's defense. Now, I don't want you calling Marvin on the phone begging for a check every week when you can work here at this car wash and learn defense. And he drove off and didn't say anything, scratching his head. It looked like he was coaching again. And if you look him up, don't do it right now because I'm doing a presentation, it will say Wayne Fonts is the most outspoken lion coach of all time. For once he was speechless. It's called autism. Now, autism refines look like this. You're off that hot black pavement. You're walking along Lake Michigan. You're walking along the ocean. All of a sudden, feels good. Dun, dun, dun. I knew that it would so good. Dun, dun. It's a piece of glass. It was refined by something greater in itself. It was refined by the ocean. It was refined by ABA therapy. It was refined by art, learning art. It was refined by occupational therapy, speech therapy, tutoring, and learning. Now, that piece of glass you don't throw out afraid of getting cut by it. You put it on your neck is jewelry. You put it on a wall is art. And that's what my mom was determined to do with me, is refine my autistic quirks into beautiful gifts. And I still have my autism moments. I remember the first girl I ever asked out on a date. I was in high school. I was a freshman. She was a sophomore. And I said, hey, how would you like to go out to a movie? On the phone. And she said this, how come you sound like a transformer? Your voice has no inflection in it. It's total monotone. So I thought I'd be cute. I said, I'm like a transformer. I'm more than meets the eye. But I still didn't get a date with that girl. So autism is unique in the special interests. My special interest was very restricted. It was very unique. And in fact, Prairie Pup is coming upon his 40th birthday this coming Saturday, because my mom got Prairie Pup. Anyone know where she got him? Right? Arts and Apples. So Prairie Pup came from Arts and Apples 40 years ago. He's 47 now. He's already met Muhammad Ali in 2002, Roberta Flack. He's met Kurt Armstrong, Booger. When Booger met him, I said, can you put your finger up your nose and have a picture of Prairie Pup? He said, I'll do better than that. I'll shove that dog up my... And he shoved him right up his nose. You thought I was going to say something else. That's autism for you. But autism is very restricted. When I was growing up in the 80s, you had G.I. Joe, you had Transformers, you had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then you had Prairie Pup. You also had Teddy Ruxpin, but now Teddy's an addict in 2 Teddy movies. But Prairie Pup was a very unique gift, and my mom used him to teach me social skills. One girl made him a jean jacket, one made him a cowboy, and it got me interacting and working on those social skills by having Prairie Pup. And he went everywhere with me, and I've now spoken everywhere from Madagascar to Israel, and Prairie's been everywhere I go. And one more thing, look at Prairie in the picture. Now look at him now. If anyone wants to give into his ministry, give him a little Rogaine. Don't give him Viagra. At his age, he'll have a heart attack and die right on the stage. But once he had a full head of hair. Cheddar the squirrel. And first I'm going to share about autism is this. Autism is just one disability. So I had autism, but when I wrote my name, how did I write it? Backwards, so I had dyslexia. I also have dysgraphia, bad handwriting, so I can pass for any doctor, write a script in the Metro Detroit area. So my mom knew that I had a great memory ability, but I had very little ability with phonics. To me, the biggest scam in U.S. history, it isn't Enron, it's hooked on phonics. 80% of all kids you'll meet with autism are visual learners. They can't learn phonetically. One teacher said it this way, well, teach your son 50% using visual, like you say, and 50% using phonetics. And my mom said they only have a 50% education because he can't learn anything phonetically. If I hear burr or ball, I can't distinguish them. So what she did when I was 5 years old, when I wrote my name backwards, she'd have me draw pictures. Here's a picture I drew at 5 years old. These are copies of them. She'd have me tell her a story. She'd write down the story. She'd have me rewrite the story. And there's a movie called Fierce Love and Art, narrated by Temple Grandin and done by Dr. Lawrence Becker. I got to go to Austin, Texas when the premiere came out, and I'm one of the 7 featured artists in the movie. And they're working on getting it on Amazon Prime. And within 2 years of helping me learn the way my brain works, I went from dyslexia to no dyslexia. So when we teach people with autism in a way they can learn, they can accomplish great things. You look at Elon Musk, he's on the autism spectrum. Bill Gates, he's on the autism spectrum. So we have all these great gifts, but we need to refine them like my mom believed. And one of the things, too, is using a kid's special interest. Notice how old this is? The Get-Along Gang. One of my favorite lunch boxes. And unlike most kids, I still have it in mint condition because with autism, we take really good care of the stuff we have. So my mom would use things like this, squirrels, baseball cards. I was an avid follower of baseball. And then she'd write me letters from Cheddar to Squirrel and send them in the mail. When Michaela gets old enough, she'll have her own little prairie dog. She'd also make animals that teach me social skills. Here's one of the letters. Notice 12 cents, and they say there's no inflation. The last time I sent something, it was like 66 cents to send the letter. So here's one of the things she wrote me when I was 5 years old. These go all the way up to about 8 years old. Dear Ronnie, this is my new friend Scamper. She came and stayed with me just recently. She knows Bushy Tail. What I like about her is her peacefulness. She is a great listener. Notice, too, on the letter from 1982 or 81, listen is what? Underlined. Because we on the spectrum have a very difficult time being able to listen to advice, listen to things going on. And since a young age, I always loved animals. Before there was Prairie Pup, there was Woody. Prairie Pup needs some hair operation. This guy needs plastic surgery. His eyes came out over the years. Other things came out. Maybe I can get him in. Then there was little Woody. So my mom used all these little knickknacks and toys that teach me how to learn. And it's important with kids with autism, you know their special interests. And there's Cheddar sending the letter. And when I was in third grade, when I was in fourth grade, I went to University Hills. And one of my teachers, Miss Melanie, decided to have me enter the Detroit Edison poster contest. Anyone remember the poster commercial in 1980s for Detroit Edison? It was "Look Up," and it's Isaiah Thomas saying it. And the kid's like, "But I don't see anything." And Isaiah Thomas says, "Good, there's no electrical wires." So here's what my poster showed. It showed Prairie Pup building a fort with people like Woody and the squirrels, and the fort's right near an electrical wire, and there's a squirrel about to hit a transmitter with a hammer. And it says this, "Look up, you don't want to become a furry fried friend." And it won first prize, and that was the first celebrity that Prairie Pup met, Isaiah Thomas. And he's gone on, as I said, to meet many famous people over the years. And there's common misconceptions about autism. The first common misperception is that we're all Rain Man. Rain Man was a man who was controlled by his environment. The word autism means self. It means you're self-absorbed. It's from the Greek word autos in Koine Greek, which is a biblical Greek. And the first view is kind of classic autism, a person who, when they hear loud noises, they got to cover their ears, and they're totally controlled by it. And they repeat something. Who's on first? What's on second? They echoleo. The second view of autism is Forrest Gump, a person who can sit on a bench next to some random person and tell them their whole life story in about 3 hours. And they don't filter themselves. I got to go pee from this Dr. Pepper. Or Mom said, life's like a box of chocolates. She didn't know I was going to come out of these loins. Well, my experience with autism wasn't like Rain Man. It wasn't like Forrest Gump. It was more like Sally the Seal. And here's the story of Sally the Seal. In 1989, Exxon Valdez hired a drunken sailor to take 54 gallons of crude oil across Prince William Sound. He had a few too many drinks, he hit an iceberg, and within 24 hours, 34 million gallons of crude oil covered the coastline. Over 500,000 birds died, over 300 seals, or 30 killer whales all died from this event. So Exxon Valdez hired the locals and hired a bunch of people to clean up the coastline. And they cleaned up the whole coastline, spent over $2 billion. And after cleaning up the coastline, they realized they forgot one key ingredient, the wildlife that was victimized by the oil spills. So they decided to hire the WWF. I'm not talking about, oh yeah, Randy Macho Man Savage. I'm talking about the World Wildlife Foundation. They hired them on, said, let's get some celebrities, let's raise some money, and let's clear up the rest of the animals there, clean them up to save money. And they decided for their mascot to raise the money, they'd have Sally the Seal. They invited Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Arnold Schwarzenegger said, Sally the Seal will be back. And they spent $10,000 on that one seal to clean her up and get her back into the wild. The big day came. CNN was there. Fox News. All the media was on Sally the Seal. She went slipping from a slide into the sea. And out of nowhere came a killer whale. And Sally the Seal became Sally the Meal. Now, my experience with autism was more like Sally the Meal. I got torn up, and spit out. The boys recognized me. They had that sonar like the killer whale who recognized Sally right away as something that would be a good meal. My worst bullying incident happened when I was on the track team my freshman year. One of the track runners stole a tarantula, put it in a Ziploc bag. Another track runner dared me to stew up some tarantula stew using a shot put. At first I wasn't going to do it. Then he double dog dared me. And I couldn't resist. I took the shot put, made some tarantula stew, and then that guy, bam, he hit me. Next day his friend, boom, he hit me. It was like Batman. Wow, bow, bang. Only I felt like Sally the Mule that minute. My favorite thing about autism is sensory processing is different. One time I spoke at a large church, Rob Parsley, and he said, I don't understand how you can speak in front of 65,000 members of my, or 6,500 members of my church and not STEM. And then he said, I watch you and you do STEM. It's your ring. See? I see people out there STEMing. Women, it's their hair. They'll be moving their hair. And my favorite sensory processing issue happened when I was in 3rd grade. My mom took me to a Cub Scout event, and they had a clown with a red nose, red hair, white makeup. And my mom knew that I had difficulty sitting still for a long period of time, so she decided to have me front and center in front of 200 people, the families of all the people in Cub Scouts. And the clown knew nothing about autism, but in a very short time, he was about to become an expert on autism. He thought it'd be funny to take his lamb puppet, take the hat off my head, put it on another kid's head, and put it back on mine. He got off my head, put it on another kid's head, and he was about to put it on, and one swoop, whoosh, I had that lamb puppet. And I proceeded to beat the snot out of that clown in front of about 200 people. The nose went to the side. He started going, as I hit him, and I went flying out there. I never became a bobcat, never became part of the wolf pack. I flew like an eagle. They didn't give me an Eagle Merit Badge. In fact, they need a new badge. It's the Honey Badger, because a Honey Badger doesn't give up. And after the event, the Cub Scout leaders gathered together, and they called my parents up and said, come in, we need to talk to you. They said, if he'd do that to a clown, imagine what he'd do to one of our kids. And they officially kicked me out of the Cub Scouts of America. I'm still waiting for an info commercial on Cub Scouts. Were you kicked out due to autism? You may have a financial gain waiting for you. They did it for other people they hurt, but they haven't done it for me yet. I'm not going to stand by my phone waiting. Something horrible happened beginning 8th grade. Prairie Pup became the first prairie dog to get officially expelled from the Rochester public school systems. What I like to share is, thank God my special interest wasn't a honey badger back then, because a honey badger doesn't give up. And if you don't understand a honey badger, just Google the video and you'll hear a wisp voice with every F-bomb in the book. In fact, I got my first honey badger on my honeymoon. I was in the Windy City, and there it was, one of the big department windows. There was a honey badger. He growled at me. I growled back. It was love at first sight. But when I bought that honey badger, what I didn't realize is when you press the paw, every F-bomb in the book comes out of his little mouth. I don't bring him for two reasons. Number one, I don't want him to go off when I'm speaking and people think I'm doing a live demonstration of that meltdown I just showed you. And number two is I don't want Child Protective Services asking me how my daughter learned every F-bomb in the book and have to explain it wasn't the dad who taught him, it was a honey badger. But beginning my junior year, my life was on the right track. I gave my life to Jesus Christ. I made him Lord and Savior of my life. I quit drinking. I quit hanging around with influences that weren't good on me, and I was running on the track team. My relay team, my junior year, finished 12th in the state of Michigan, and on the way back from the state finals, a guy named Nate Clay made this comment. Next year we'd be the fastest relay team in the state of Michigan, but we won't have Ron on our relay team. Wherever there's a but, you negate the first part of the sentence. But we will not have Ron on our relay team because he'll be past the age limit. You see, in kindergarten, I was held back. So I was 19 years old coming in my senior year. And right then, I heard God speak to me. And only 2 times in my life have I really heard him speak that clear. One was when he called me to go to Oral Roberts University to get my degree, and it was this moment. He said, I'll provide a way you'll run on the track team. And I said, I'm going to run on the track team. And Coach Bud said, no one has ran on the track team past the age limit in over 20 years. People have tried and they've failed. But I knew I had heard from God. And my mom, being a great advocate, she's right here, started calling all the lawyers. She called the Bernsteins. Bernstein said, we can't see this case. She called Lee. He said, it's not going to be free. She called Mike. Mike said, I don't think I can win this. She called Feiger, and he said, I'm on a highway right now having a few drinks. I'll call you when I get back. You could say he's on a highway to, that's AC/DC. I'm not going to fill it in or I'll have another autistic filtering moment. But no parody aside, every lawyer said it'd be over $40,000 for me to compete, which we couldn't afford. And the season was coming to a beginning. We were 1 week until the season began, and I get home from a 5-mile run, and there on the front page of Detroit Free Press was a young man named Craig Stanley. He was born May 1975, same year, same month as me. He was a track and cross country runner, just as I was, and he had a disability, although it wasn't autism, and was told by the MHSAA he couldn't compete. And most importantly, he was a Christian. So my mom called his mom. We got together in Grosse Pointe, where he is from. And the first words out of my mouth was, me and Craig are going to compete on the track team. I don't know how it's going to happen, but God's going to provide a way. And my mom called the Detroit Free Press and says, we need to have a second article stating there's now 2 young men whose civil rights are being violated under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That Wednesday, on the front page of Detroit Free Press, was an article about me and Craig Stanley. That Sunday, I was getting water baptized to show my commitment to following Christ and being on the right track and what he was doing in my life. And when I came out of the water at 9 a.m., the pastor looked at me and he said, I normally don't have a word from someone, but I know I heard from God. I clearly saw Joel 2:25 up above you when you came out. And it says this, I repay the years that the locust have eaten, the young locust, the other locust, the great swarm I sent among you. So there is something in your life like a locust that ate away. And right now, God said he's repaying it, and he's giving you a message that you're going to speak, and it's going to be your testimony, bring many in the kingdom of God. So I get home, and these were archaic times. Luckily, we didn't drive using our feet like the Flintstones, but we had something called an answering machine. And it's blinking red, and it's about this big. And I press the button. And these are the first words that come out of the answering machine. It shows the time, 9 a.m., the exact time I came out. And he begins like this. Hi, my name's Rick Lando. I'm a young attorney. I just got my PhD from Boston College. I have my law degree from the University of Michigan, and I want to take your case pro bono. All I need is your signature. So when God's got an assignment, he's got Navy SEALs who are armed and dangerous with PhDs from Boston College and law degrees from the University of Michigan. So we went out there, he took our case, we signed on, and we ended up running the second fastest time in the state of Michigan for the 3200 relay. I ended up getting full ride to Rochester, what is now Rochester University. The story doesn't end there. Remember how I began talking about my books? When I wrote the book, Appearance Guide to Autism, what did I say? I interviewed 50 of the top experts in the world who work in the autism spectrum field. Currently, I've interviewed over 100 with all the books I've written. I interviewed a man named Gary Marison. Here's a story of Gary Marison. Gary Marison was a high-powered lawyer out in New York. He had 2 sons on the autism spectrum, and his sons needed ABA therapy. And ABA therapy at that time, no insurance covered it. So he called his insurance company, said, my son needs ABA therapy. They said, we won't provide ABA therapy. He said, fine, you're going to provide it for everyone. You watch. So he takes him on in the Supreme Court. He wins 1 case, 2 cases, goes on to win 14 Supreme Court cases, making ABA a household name. How many people in here have ever heard of ABA? Applied Behavior Analysis, the #1 autism therapy in the world. And it's #1 because of Gary Marison. When I interviewed him, he began the interview this way. Ron, I know who you are. And he said, I'm going to tell you the ending of your book and the ending of your presentations. He says, you're going to end with the story of Anthony Sturgello. I always mispronounce his name. Here's the story of Anthony. Anthony's parents were unable to have kids. His dad and who would be his dad believed that if with love and acceptance, anything is possible. So he decided he was going to adopt a kid with special needs. They go to a foster home, and when they see little Anthony sitting there, he's going like this. And they realize that he's doing that because he wants them to sit by him, so they sit by him. And then they fall in love with little Anthony. And they decide, you know what, we're going to adopt Anthony. And when they go to the foster home and say, we want to adopt Anthony, the foster care lady says he's already been in 5 homes. He has a lot of sensory issues. He has an IQ of 100, of 50. So the average IQ is what? 100. So he has half the average IQ. And Ray, the dad, says, we know God's called us to adopt him. So Ray adopts Anthony. And he tries to get him involved in sports, get him involved in social activities, tries soccer. And there's little Anthony, just walking around with his head down. He tries baseball. Bam! Walk like an Egyptian. And nothing seems to work. And when Anthony is 13 years old, his dad takes him to a Rutgers football game. And Rutgers is playing LSU, who's undefeated at the time. And the score is tied. Rutgers has the ball with 3 seconds left, and they're in scoring position. A guy named Jeremy Lin does a repetitive behavior. 3 steps forward, 1 step back, kicks, goes through the upright. Rutgers wins. LSU won't make the playoffs. They didn't have playoffs, won't be national champs, even though they were undefeated. Now they're defeated. The whole way home, all Anthony can say is, I want to play football. I want to play football. His dad says, you know, it's a contact sport. You could get injured. I want to be a place kicker. I want to be a place kicker. So he says, all right, I'll work with you. He starts working with him. He gets him involved in a football camp. All the kids can hit from 20 feet out. Little Anthony can only hit from about 15 feet out. The dad has a choice. Do I have him stand closer when he kicks, or do I have him stand at 20 feet? He has him stand at 20 feet. He misses them all, but he improves every time. His junior year of high school, Anthony tries out for the football team as a place kicker. He makes the team. His senior year, tries out again. He makes the team, and they have a losing record all this time. Coming into his second senior year, in New Jersey, if you're on the autism spectrum, you're given 1 extra year of high school. Now he's 19. Now he's past the age limit, and now he's asking for a second year to play on the football team for his second senior year. He uses his favorite line, "I want to play football, I want to play football." The New Jersey High School Athletic Association says, we're not going to let Anthony play football. So his dad calls Gary Marison. Gary Marison says this, "Let me look on the law books to see if there's any case I can use to help Anthony compete on the football team, because he's on the autism spectrum, and I know the Americans with Disabilities will help him out." He looks, and he finds it. Sandison versus the MHSAA. He calls him back and says, "We got a case." He takes the case, they win, and Anthony's competing. God's doing something in the background. He moves a great quarterback in the neighborhood. He moves a great offensive line. Thank God he didn't move Wayne Fonts in the neighborhood, or this wouldn't be a good ending. And Anthony finds himself in the state finals, using his repetitive behavior. 3 steps forward, 1 step back, kick. And he kicks 2 field goals, and they win the state championship. And Temple Grandin says it best, "Autism makes me different, not less." And in my own life, there have been many times when I felt like the Lord God wasn't a sun shield. He didn't withhold any good things. But as I look over my life and I look over at all the good things that have happened in my life, I can say that God's hand has been upon me, and that no good thing does he withhold from those whose walk is blameless. And none of us lives a blameless life. So we need to depend on God's grace. And when you meet someone with autism, they may have different types of behavior, but it doesn't make them less. Their brain just processes information differently. And what is the one thing the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 has not accomplished in its 32-year history? And it's the most important thing. It's one of the main reasons we came up with it. Anyone know what it is? I'll let you know. A higher rate of employment for people with autism and disabilities. In fact, it's gone down. And the reason it's gone down is in the 80s, 90s, if you had a disability, I had an uncle, and he was somewhere on the autism spectrum, probably high-functioning autism or Asperger's. And when Uncle Dave died, they said this about him: "Uncle Dave was so slow, you need a pole to make sure he was moving." But he worked for the post office, so that's probably why your letters were so late in the 80s and 90s. But he was able to work for a company, or for the government, and it made sure he was employed. Now, a lot of those jobs, we outsource them, we privatize them, making it harder for people with autism to be gainfully employed. In fact, the current rate of employment with autism is staggeringly low. Studies estimate a staggering 50 to 70% or 75% of the 5.6 million autistic adults in the U.S. are unemployed or underemployed. Nearly 50% of 25-year-olds with autism have never held a paying job, despite having the skill sets and expertise that excel in the workplace. Only 3% of people with autism are gainfully employed in the United States. And what's interesting is in Europe, it's the opposite. 80% of people with disabilities and 75% of people with autism are gainfully employed. There's one way we can have people with autism gainfully employed, and it's not signing more bills, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's this: universal health care. That's why 80% of people with disabilities in Europe are gainfully employed. And we know that autism is a lifelong what? Disability. So if it's a lifelong disability, why don't you have lifelong benefits? So if you had lifelong benefits, it'd be more profitable to hire someone with autism, because then you wouldn't have to pay for their benefits as they're already paid. The average person with autism during their lifetime, it costs the government $10 million. So by giving them that universal health care, people with autism, it pays for itself and then keeps paying, because then we'll have even more inventions. Temple Grandin said this: without autism, all you'd have is a bunch of people standing around a fire, clapping their hands, saying, "Kumbaya, kumbaya." But autism enables us to have great inventions like light bulbs and electricity and electrical cars. You look at the people doing these great inventions. So by providing health care for people with autism, it will actually bring much more new invention. And that's why my goal is to be the first U.S. congressman with autism. That's the next thing I hope to accomplish. The best description I've heard of the challenge of having autism and being employed was from a coworker with Asperger's, who I'll call Mr. Ellison. That's not his real name, I changed it. Who had a master's degree in social work and was diagnosed as a teenager with Asperger's. He told me, people like me with Asperger's are the last to be hired and the first to be fired. I just lack the social skills to read people and the social grace to say things that don't offend. I have been fired from my share of jobs the past few years by saying the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time. The only job I'm able to keep and maintain is a taxi drive because clients are forced to hear my crazy stories since I'm in the driver's seat. And I always love that quote. I use that in my book. And for many on the autism spectrum, this is what employment looks like. I hate my job. Oh, please. One of my favorite quotes in interviewing young adults with autism was a guy named Jesse who wrote Asperger's 101 and My Life with Asperger's. He said this: my dad said you need a job where you'll never get fired for saying the wrong comment or get arrested for sexual harassment in the workplace. So he said, I got the perfect job. I got a job at the funeral home. All the clients are dead. And it's interesting is that when I had my Americans with Disabilities case in 1995, I broke the school record in Flint against Kersley, my relay team did. And then years later, I'd be speaking in Flint in the very place where Bill Clinton, Slick Willie, signed a bill amending the Americans with Disabilities Act, providing more money for technology and helping people with disabilities. But you know what? Didn't do anything to improve employment for young people with autism or disabilities. And like I said, it's not going to change until we bring that universal health care to help people out. And my dad was one of the ones who really helped me be gainfully employed. I'm going on now, 14 years gainfully employed, speaking in a hospital. I speak at 70 events a year. I'll be speaking in Lansing this Sunday. I'll be speaking in Lansing on Saturday, Troy on Sunday. And I get to speak all around. My dad's now 88 years old. There's a picture of him on his birthday. And my dad had this kind of mindset. If a man will not work, he shall not eat. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, we call it a Protestant work ethic. So from an early age, my dad had me working, learning skills. I had my first job mowing the lawn at age 12, so I was learning hard manual labor. I had my first job outside of the house at age 14 at God's Waiting Room, Bill Knapp's. And there's a reason it's called God's Waiting Room as you look at the picture. Number one, it looks like a funeral home. Number two, your discount on your birthday is based on your age. So the older you are, the more money you get off. And it smells like a nursing home. Onward, Christian soldiers. Some of those ones are going to get there a lot quicker if they're eating at Bill Knapp's. And the horrible smell I had to deal with, but exposure to different environments like that enabled me to learn to process my sensory issues. Having a job from an early age helped me learn life skills such as budgeting and saving money, dealing with angry customers, and making friends with coworkers. And by having exposure to a lot of different environments, and even in college, I went to Madagascar one summer, Cameroon, Bulgaria. By traveling a lot, I saw how other cultures work, and I realized how our culture works. And I was able to learn a lot of the social skills that people with autism have difficulty with. And in my senior year at Oral Roberts University, during the summer, I got to mentor under Dr. Jack Van Impe. They call him the Walking Bible. He had 15,000 Bible verses memorized. And the reason I was able to mentor under him is when I met him in 94, when I was a junior in high school, he quoted a bunch of verses like a machine gun at me. And I gave him word reference perfect to every one. And when I got done, he says, when you get into college, you're going to mentor under me, and you're going to intern under me. And Temple Grandin said it this way: talent attracts mentors. And he saw a talent in me and saw something in me and took me under his wing. There's Armani Williams. His story is in Views from the Spectrum. And I love how he says it. He's a NASCAR driver. Tell me I can't so I can show you I can. And a lot of times people are going to tell you you can't when you're on the autism spectrum, but you got to work that much harder to accomplish your goals. There's an old saying that I live by. It's by a famous preacher, Charles Spurgeon. He said this: by perseverance, the snail made it on the ark. So you could be slow as a snail, but if you're going in the right direction, you're going to get on that ark and you're going to accomplish your goals. And then finally, we still have stereotypical thoughts about autism. How society sees us. E equals MC squared, kind of this guy who's a brilliant savant. Only 10% of people with autism are savants. How our neurotypical friends see us. At Selton, we're kind of out there. We're kind of just unusual. How our parents see us. Remember little Anthony and his dad Ray saw him as all the kids are having fun. There's Anthony by himself on the soccer field or out there in left field by himself. How the media sees us. Social interaction, not very fascinating. That's Spock for you younger guys. And how we see ourselves. I Miss My Planet. Remember when I talked about my favorite book growing up? Parents Guide, or Welcome to No Man's Valley. You know what it's a book about? Endangered species. Imagine being only one of 10,000 people on the autism, or one of 10,000 diagnosed with autism out of every 10,000 children. I felt different. So that's why that was my favorite book. No Man's Valley is about an endangered species, and that's how I felt being on the autism spectrum. But how we really are. There he is, a good doctor, parents, experts. I'm going to end on this quote that I came up with. Any fool can see an apple on a tree, but it takes vision and dedication to see an orchard in the apple seed. And I want to encourage you, when you work with kids with autism, if you have a son on the spectrum, a daughter on the spectrum, to see the potential, to see that vision of where they can be. And my mom didn't see my speech being so delayed that she saw a person who'd be speaking to people, masses of people. She saw when I looked hopeless and beat up a clown, she saw a person who would someday be gainfully employed, and she never gave up on me. She always had vision and dedication to see that orchard in the apple seed. And I just want to encourage you. I got copies of my 3 books back there. My 2 books on autism, they're just $10. I'll sign them when I become a U.S. congressman on the spectrum. They'll be worth something. And then my book on theology I have, that's $15. Thank you so much. I'll be back there signing books. We also got time for question and answers, if anyone has any questions or answers. Yeah.
The clown day was probably the worst day I ever had with my son. And my husband said, that really happened? And I said, really happened.
Yeah, men quickly forget something like that, dads. Yeah, right there. Why the what? Oh, what? Puzzle people. So here's why. I see it this way, is that we have great gifts and we can put them all together, then we can showcase our talent. That's how I see the puzzle. I don't see it as we're missing something, because we're really not missing anything. But the puzzle for me means that we got to figure out how we fit into things. With my whole life, I felt kind of out of place. I felt like an endangered species. But when I realized how I fit in, I realized how to refine my gifts, my talents, I've been able to accomplish amazing things. And I thought about changing my symbol to, there's another autism symbol that they have right now that's going around. Any other questions? Yeah.
How did you stay
think one of the things is that really motivated my faith, because I knew that God had something great for me. I knew I had these great visions and dreams of what I wanted to do, and I just didn't give up. A lot of times people with autism fall into the hopeless complex. In 1967, Dr. Martin and Dr. Muir discovered the hopeless complex, and they discovered it while using electric shock treatments on dogs at the University of Pennsylvania. When they give the dogs on the group A a shock on the left side, they quickly move to the right. Group B, when they give them the shock on the right side, they move to the left side. And group C, no matter how many times they shocked them, they wouldn't move. So Dr. Martin says to Muir, I don't understand. All dogs go to heaven. Group C is going to get there quicker. I give them a shock on the left side, they don't move the right side. He said, well, you see, yesterday I gave them a shock on the right side to move to the left side. They learned hopelessness. And I think a lot of time people learn hopelessness, but when my dad, he always had me having jobs. So I had these little victories of working at Bill Knapp's and earning money. I had these little victories of along the way of winning the Detroit Edison poster contest, or setting the school record, or running the second fastest time in the state of Michigan, getting scholarship, and by those little victories and keep moving ahead, it ended up bringing about what you see today. Yeah.
Were you ever on any medication, and what about that seafood diet?
I was never on any diets. I was on the seafood diet. I'd eat what I want. And I never took any medication. Today I take 3 things. I take multivitamin, vitamin C. During COVID, I took vitamin D. And I take red rice yeast for my cholesterol. But I take everything natural. There's a verse in Ecclesiasticus. It's one of the Apocrypha. God has made the earth yield hewing herbs, which a prudent man should not neglect. And it's in the Greek, it'd be the Sophia, or the wise man. So I try to keep everything natural. I try to work out a lot. They say that sensory processing issues will go down 20% with physical activity. And the problem is that 3 out of 4 people with higher needs on the autism spectrum have obesity. So a lot of it, we are what we eat. Where our body goes, our mind will follow. So a lot of taking care of our physical health. I was telling someone the other day, I can still bench press 200 pounds, and I can still run a mile in under 5 minutes. And I'm 47 years old. But I try, and a lot of times people are like, you don't age much, but it's because I take care of my body. And before I go to sleep, I do 30 push-ups. And then back to motivation. Motivation is only a shot for quick response. But habits keep us going. And I have a lot of habits and routines, and those habits and routines are hard to break. We're a creature of what? Habit. So if you can make habits, then you're going to be motivated. Motivation is supposed to be short-term, to begin a habit, then that habit keeps you going and going, just like the Energizer Bunny. He keeps going and going. And there's a question back there. Someone? Oh, yeah.
You spoke a little about bullying.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
So when I was bullied in the 80s, they let people get away with it. I remember when I was at Rochester Adams, there was a guy, and I had a Jordan jersey on, and he ripped the buttons off of it, and I ended up hitting him. And the gym teacher at the time said, I don't like that, Eric. I'll leave the room if you want to finish the fight. So in the 80s, it was way different than it is today. Today you wouldn't see that. But there's one thing you can do to make bullying go down by, and there's actually a chapter in Parents' Guide to Autism on bullying. And one thing you can do is if you have a kid who's 1 year older than your kid on the spectrum, hang out with them, the odds that someone bullying them goes down 90% because they see the older kid and they're not going to mess with someone who's with someone else. And the reason people with the autism spectrum are easy prey for the killer whales is usually they're isolated. Usually they're alone. But by having someone there, that's their bulletproof vest. I have a cousin who works as a parole officer in the worst part of Detroit, so my grandpa, before he died, got him a bulletproof vest. And that's what that extra help does, is it makes sure that the bad guys aren't going to go after that kid who is on the autism spectrum. Any other question? Yeah, back there. Yeah. So here's how I see it. There's no person who's not at all autistic. There's no person who's totally autistic. Even God has his autistic moments. That's why the planets spin. But I think that there's some who are much more higher needs. And that goes back to they need higher resources. And we need to have those higher resources. And there was an old warehouse commercial for TVs. I think it was Fetter who had it. I'm saying the name wrong. ABC Warehouse is one. ABC Warehouse used to have this commercial, and it was right before Thanksgiving for Black Friday. And it's two guys. First one has a broken arm. Second one has a broken leg. First one says, I held the door open last year and I have a broken arm. The other one says, I have a broken leg and because I held it open 2 years ago. And sometimes with higher needs, because they can't express themselves verbally, aggression is how they express themselves. So the goal of refinement is not to make them verbal. It's not to make them a Bill Gates or a Elon Musk. It's make them not beat up their group home manager. So for different people on different needs, the needs are different. And there's some who will always be nonverbal. And they need a higher amounts of needs. That's why I don't say more severe autistic or less severe. I say higher needs or lesser needs. Because if they're higher needs, that tells me more of how I can help them than if I just give a diagnosis. Yeah.
Can I say something that Dr. mentioned with your hand? Ron's in a document, and this is addressing the man in the Beck's statement of, what do you do with a very low functioning child? The movie has 9 autistic children. And interestingly enough, Ron is one of the older children, and almost all the parents of the older children did very similar things with their children. But one of the things that came out, there's children in the movie who cannot walk across the street on their own. And they can't go to the bathroom on their own. One of those boys left the opening to the movie to go to an art show that was his work in Rome and in France. And I'm an artist, and I know a lot of wonderful artists, and I don't know any who are on their way to Rome or France. But what each parent did is they exposed their children to a lot of different things. And they exposed them to one thing, and maybe the kid didn't have, any interest whatsoever. And they just kept on exposing them to more and more different kinds of things until they found something that was a fit. Now, my feeling about the movie, it's a wonderful movie. Not every person with autism is a savant. What my goal would be as a parent, even seeing this movie, is to find whatever your kid can do. Whatever gives them some satisfaction, maybe some comfort, and work with what they can do. And I think as you work with what they can do, you can provide them with the best possible life that they can have. And so my goal in talking to parents is always, let's take them where they're at. If they can move forward, let's move them forward. But part of it's exposure, finding things, I think one of the reasons why Dutton Farms is a great place is it's got lots of things kids can try out. Maybe some kid just likes petting an animal. Well, there's animals. You can pet animals. So, but fulfillment, it's really, I think, success comes out of what they can do and not so much focusing on what they can't do. Now, with Ron personally, what I chose to do is if I saw a real deficit, he was going to have to take a proficiency exam to pass high school with a signed diploma. And I thought, darn, this kid is not going to graduate from high school after 19 years of experience beating his brains out and not get a proficiency diploma because he's not as good at math. I took him, and Debbie Norton was his tutor, and she had a neighbor a couple doors down who was good at math, and I went down there. Debbie had suggested her, and I took him there, and I had him tutored. And the math tutor shot way over his head. She was worked with NASA or something. She was really brilliant, but she was proficient enough to be able to find out where his weaknesses were, and he ended up with a diploma where he had a signed diploma that he was proficient in math as well as everything else. And and that was what was odd is I had three children go through the school system, and Ron's was the only year that they had to pass a proficiency test. And I thought, wow, and then they changed the rules after that, and nobody else had to go through that, except I found out later my daughter-in-law did, and she failed math. So what I tried to do with Ron is I said, what's his weakest link? Okay, math. Let's get him some tutoring. Let's get working on math. What's his strongest strength? Okay, we'll work with the strongest strength, and we'll work with the weakest link. And, Ron happened to fortunately have a lot of resources within himself, but even a child who doesn't have a lot, what is their weakest link? What is their strongest strength? Give them what they need in their strongest areas and support them in their weakest areas. Give them a comfortable environment. Give them an accepting environment. Give them a loving environment. I ran art classes at my son's church for children with autism. And interestingly enough, it ended up almost being like a youth group. I had one grandma come to me recently, and she said, with COVID, I had to stop, and then my husband has some disabilities, so I had to stop. But she said, that's the first friend my son ever made was at your art class. And I did it partially. My thought was, let's put it out there, and let's see if we can help anybody with autism. I was expecting little people, and I got big people. And it was okay, because they ended up bonding with one another on their level. If you had walked in there, you might have felt totally uncomfortable. But there were kids who were able to, understand one another on the level they were on. They were all doing art. They were all there together. So, I think always look for the weakest and support that, and look for the strongest and build that. And, not everybody's not going to come out the same way, because we're not, neural normal people are not all the same. We don't all have the same gifts, but we can provide children with the best that they can have given their, makeup and their disabilities, I think.
And she said it better than I could say it. And anyone else? Questions? I'll be out back there in the back selling my books. Encourage you get a copy. And I'll sign them. Thanks so much for having me come.